What's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of the Hero Club podcast. I'm your host, Brett McPeters, and my co-host, Micah Howell over here, co-founders of Hometown Hero Sports Agency. We're excited to be back for another episode. If you haven't listened to our pilot episode and our first official episode, go back, check it out, hear a little bit about us. We're pumped to be back, so welcome back. Hopefully we've got some new listeners, returners, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think this episode we're really diving into a little bit about the beginning of NIL, where we said before we're really trying to expand on what NIL is, where NIL came from, what's going on in the NIL world. So with the start of this episode, with that, Micah, you want to dive in a little bit about where NIL came from, the beginning, the start, all that kind of jazz.
Yeah, absolutely excited to be back here for this episode of the Hero Club. We'll go ahead and dive on in. So where NIL started, and we want to kind of give a background for all of our listeners going forward, so you know what we do, and why we do it. And so just to give a background of where NIL came from, why it started, and really just kind of how it's affected college sports now. But starting off just with how we got here. So NIL all became legal on July 1st of 2022. And so when that became legal, it was a really big thing in the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court finally came out and said right around June 30th, a couple of days before NIL actually started, the Supreme Court said, "Hey, we're not going to back you on this one." They told that to the NCAA. And so what that meant was that any rules the NCAA set, they were also liable for. Well, the NCAA didn't like that. And so the NCAA essentially then said, all right, well, we are not going to set new rules for it. And you saw a lot of repercussions for that. That's kind of how NIL got to where it is today. That was
I think that they were scared originally, right? Like nobody wanted to be the reason that the chopping block came down and them be responsible.
Exactly. NIL, when it started, it was really just kind of sitting there and hoping like you weren't the farthest person out. Everybody wanted to be in second. Nobody wanted to be in first, because
right.
If you were in first and something came out, then you're the first person to go down for it.
And like everybody was excited about pushing to make sure it happened, but then it's like, okay, well, if any repercussions come back, like I don't want to be the person that is first place in charge of that.
Exactly. And we're really just now starting to see that trend change and people trying to be in first.
For sure.
Yeah. But anyways, when the Supreme Court came out and said that, and the NCAA then said, all right, well, we don't want to be responsible for it either. And so what happened after that was they passed it on to the states. The NCAA passed it on to the states. Well, you had about 50-50. Some states said, okay, well, here are going to be our rules for our states. In our case, I mean, Alabama, we set rules. Georgia, y'all set rules. But then you had states like Texas who did not set rules. So that's why you saw teams like Texas A&M have great recruiting classes, because for 6 months or however long it lasted before people started to repeal those rules, those states had a massive recruiting advantage because they could kind of just do whatever they wanted to. And so you also saw right around that same time the Gator Collective. The Gator Collective was the first collective to start down at Florida. Mm-hmm. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in this episode. But you started to see a couple other collectives pop up all over the place. And so that was really just where NIL kind of started to hit the wild. That's why so many people call it today the Wild Wild West, is NIL. And I mean, that working in it, I can confidently tell you that couldn't be more true.
100% true.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I've worked in it, started on July 1st, and I started working in it in November right after that. And so I've been around it for a lot of its existence, and kind of seen the shifts, the trends, the changes. And it has been nuts to watch, a blast to work in, but absolutely insane. And so that's kind of where NIL started. That's the basics of the beginning of it. So I'd say that we mentioned the Gator Collective a little bit. The Gator Collective has actually been in the news a lot in the past couple of days, because of their
spicy information.
Yeah. So I mean, we saw earlier this offseason that Anthony Richardson declared for the draft, and they also had a couple quarterbacks transfer out. So
Before you go any further, what's your prediction on where Anthony Richardson are going the draft?
so Anthony Richardson's interesting because he has massive
Heck of an
upside.
athlete, man.
Heck of an athlete. But I mean, you saw this year, he's kind of hit or miss. I mean, you don't know if he's going to pass for 350 in a game or if he's going to pass for 100 on
I
30%
just
completion. Like,
I don't think his quarterback package is fully there. Like if we were drafting on athletes, he'd go first round. Like he's a stud,
yeah,
but I just don't think his aren't like. And I think one of the biggest things that I noticed about him over the season is like he literally it could be like 5 yard passes and he's throwing absolute rockets,
yeah,
which is fine sometimes. Like it's necessary at some points, and like NFL receivers will be better at catching passes like that than some of these college guys that are freshmen, sophomores.
mm-hmm.
But it's like he doesn't have the quarterback feel. Like it's not fully there.
Absolutely. But I mean, you also got to look at Carson Wentz, who bad example now, but for his first couple of years looked really good. Josh Allen, opposite of Carson Wentz, looked not great for his first couple of years,
It's
but
true.
had the athleticism, and then after the first couple of years, kind of turned it around, figured it out, could read defenses, that kind of stuff.
It's very true.
Now he's arguably the best quarterback in the NFL. So, I mean, it's kind of where you
Who
fall.
knows, man?
I think Anthony Richardson will still go first round. I think he'll go later first round. I think he's a project. He's definitely not a day one starter.
You think he goes before Will Levis?
No. So I'm not super,
Means a lot
super
of
high on Will
QBs are going to
Levis.
get taken in the first round.
I'm gonna say five. I'm gonna
Bryce
say
Young, C.J. Stroud, Will
Bryce Young,
Levis.
CJ, Levis, Hendon Hooker, and Anthony Richardson.
That's right.
So I was actually looking at mock draft earlier today. So
I don't think AR-15 goes in the first round.
he changed his nickname. He's not that anymore. Very
What is
particular
it?
about that. He just took it away.
It's
So
just how do you just take away a nickname? You can't do that.
well, when your
That fair?
nickname is an assault rifle
That's
in
fair.
today's climate, he decided that it was best to take it away.
I mean,
Which
I
I
understand it,
respect
but
the
like
decision.
it's stuck.
Yeah, I mean, there's every time I think about him, I still think of the nickname. I just try not to say it.
It's fair.
So
I'll try and refrain, but it's a lot easier than saying Anthony Richardson.
yeah, that's true. But yeah, so I think five go first round. That's my
That's wild.
that's my prediction. It would be a lot, but especially in Anthony Richardson's
It's a
case,
lot.
it's just hard to look at that athleticism and and not think about all the potential that there is. If
Yeah,
you
if he
can teach
has the
him to
right
read it,
coaching.
if you can teach him to read a defense, and if you can teach him just to learn like the feel, just be comfortable.
I think he needs to go somewhere with a veteran quarterback where he can take a year or two, learn, be coached up, and then like with that athleticism, then like I mean, he has full potential to be like a Lamar or what I mean, because he's just such a good dual threat quarterback.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
Lots
I
of
mean that's the
possibilities.
direction you see the NFL going. You look at Justin Fields, just blew up at the end of this season, so
Yeah.
absolutely could be.
Jalen Hurts.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for sure.
So
But anyway, yeah, so Jaden Rashada, I mean, what is this mayhem? I mean,
it,
I think the main like the stem of the problem that this is coming from is we talk a lot about like NIL right now. It's really hit or miss whether you're going to where there's schools that are using NIL to recruit versus not. Georgia being one of them. I'm sure Alabama doesn't. But then you have the A&Ms, the Floridas, and it's like it's creating problems because you see with especially with the transfer portal the way it is right now. But you see this guy, I mean, he was guaranteed 13 million over 4 years. Which is already a little spicy because if he's that good, then he could leave after 3, go to the draft. So is what happens to the other 4.5 that he was guaranteed.
Yeah.
or not 4.5. I
Over
don't know the exact math
It would have
of
been
what it
three,
was a
about
year.
3.5
Okay.
or 3.25.
But it's like you've got a 5-star quarterback that is, if you're going to guarantee him that much money, you're going to guarantee that he's staying for, I mean, I guess when you have 3 million a part of it that you don't want him to stay a fourth, but what is the deal though? He asked that he could take back his national letter of intent. Is that even
Yeah.
possible?
So what happened was, and I don't know where legally, nobody else has seen the contracts. And also, it's not, we don't know who's leaked the 13 million number. So it's not a guarantee that that's an accurate
Right.
number.
That's
But
fair.
for the sake of this argument, we'll assume that 13 is accurate. Um, and I mean, it's apparently the person who was donating the 13 backed off or backed away from the collective. So the
Mm,
collective no longer had the $13 million to give him. So then it came down to they couldn't pay him anymore. Well, on Jaden's side, that contract that he signed can't legally say that you're making 13 million to come to the University of Florida, like to play football at the
right.
University of Florida.
Right.
It's more of like a handshake, wink, wink type thing.
Yeah.
Like,
By the way, under
right,
the rug, you
yeah,
show up. That's
right.
in the
But
bag.
now what's interesting and where it comes into nobody's seen that contract or knows for sure what it says is if they decide or if Jaden decides like, hey, this contract never said that I had to that I had to come to the University of Florida for this, then if there was a contract there, technically and legally, again, never seen it, but they could owe him $13 million even if he never plays a snap for them. So
Oh no, that would cause so many problems.
that would cause a lot of problems. Where this gets interesting now for the Gator collective down the line is, I mean, say you're a 5-star quarterback in next year's class. You just saw this happening. They promise you $10 million. Do you trust them to pay out that $10 million?
Or especially if it's like if like you, the chances that what happens, like you just said, if he doesn't go and he still gets paid, like who's going to stop anybody from doing something similar? I mean, the athlete would be cheating the system at that point, which I feel like they would definitely find a way to prevent that. But I mean, that causes a lot of speculation for what could happen in the years to come when recruiting athletes. And we see, obviously, recruiting is such a big part of building a football program that's going to last.
Yeah.
Ooh. I'm
Yeah.
very interested to see where this goes. I'm excited for it to play out and see what happens
I'm
because
excited to see what happens. I'm excited to see just what are the repercussions for this? This will have repercussions for years.
well, and I think it's just shedding a spotlight on Florida that we're not prepared to have because, like we said, it's not something like these numbers being thrown out and what's going on with what they're going to pay him. Like that's not something you want to be spread on the news nationally.
Right.
Like we said, it's something that kind
But
of
you also got to
happens in
think
the
about
back
who's
room
leaking
with
the
the
numbers because they're like, if it is it a Florida, is it a collective person leaking numbers? Because if it's your case, maybe that number was 5 million, but if you're in the collective and you're just leaking a number, publicity wise, it's almost better for you to say, hey, like we had 13 million to give him, like we got the money.
right.
So you got to think
Yeah,
about it
because
that way
then
too.
if it doesn't go through and he doesn't get paid, he goes somewhere else, like all is well, no transaction. Then
Mm-hmm.
you're thinking as a Florida player that's thinking about committing to Florida, it's like, man, they were going to pay him 13 million. They didn't do it. Like they got cash in the bank.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So we'll see what happens. And it's wild because the Gator Collective they were the first collective to ever start. I mean, they've been around
Right.
longer than anyone else. You'd think that they'd have it under control if anybody did.
For
So
sure.
it's nuts, but we'll see the
Nothing's ever
repercussions of this.
guaranteed.
I'm interested to see how it goes and what happens from here. I'm also interested to see where Jaden ends up going now. Because I mean he was supposed to enroll already. Like
What are his other options?
he was committed to Miami until November.
Originally, yeah, he
Yeah,
flipped.
until November, flipped and signed his letter of intent with Florida, and then now he's asking for a release from that. So I guess he would just enroll. I mean, it's too late. It's too late to enroll now. So now he's just waiting until
Yeah, you
summer.
just have to graduate normal time.
Yeah. Well, he's already graduated. He was
Oh,
ready
that's
to go.
true. Yeah. So what? He
So
probably
now
just trained.
he's just training. I mean, I'm sure he'll do some endorsement deals. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on and kind of leads into our next topic. There's a myth going around and a lot when NIL first started that NIL was really only for the top 3% of athletes. Brett, what are your kind of thoughts on that? How has it played out? And just where are you standing now with it?
Um, I'm pretty in between.
Okay.
Like, there's definitely not a hard yes or no on if like the top 3% totally overtake NIL because in what we're doing with our company, Hometown Heroes every day, we see that we can create value for NIL at all different levels, all different sports, D1, D2, D3, JUCO. We've got them all. We've signed deals with every single one of them. So NIL is not strictly just available for those top 3%. Like anybody can create value no matter who you are, where you are, what sport you play. We see that every day.
Yeah.
But in this $1 billion industry that we're in, we do see with the Floridas with the $13 million and I mean, this guy's a 5-star recruit. The Bryce Youngs, the Brock Bowers, the CJ Strouds, Caleb Williams, like that top 3% of athletes are, I think, taking up a large majority of the chunk of that $1 billion industry. Like I'd say almost 75% of that $1 billion industry is coming from the top 3%. So I think they I don't want to say they run NIL, but
Yeah.
there's a difference,
Yeah,
obviously.
there's a difference, and I'm not going to say that they run it, but I will say that the major difference is so there has been a pretty major difference, and I would say that the difference has been, for the most part, really collectives. I'd say that's what's played the biggest factor. Um, and talking to some of the people, some of the athletes who have participated with, and kind of seeing those collectives is I mean, I've talked to so the example that a lot of people used when this first started was they were scared to see how the quarterback versus the offensive line versus the receivers, how kind of that locker room interaction started to happen.
Right.
And a collective has really come in and started to kind of play a role in keeping that locker room tension low. Because while use Alabama for example, you have Bryce Young, he's being taken care of, he's making upwards of $2-3 million. But you also have the offensive linemen who, first off, we have to take off the expectation. They never came in expecting to make the same as Bryce Young. And
Right.
so that's not, they never expected it. It was a very clear understanding that they were not going to make that. And so that was off the table from the start. So the job of the collective was never to make sure that everyone made equal amounts, but the job was always just that everyone was taken care of. And taking care of looks different for every athlete. In this
Mm.
case, I've talked to an Alabama offensive lineman before about coming to our agency. And in his case, this was during the season. He was not interested in really looking at NIL during the season. He wanted to take the season, focus on his sport, focus on getting better. But he told me, he was like, I'm taken care of enough by our collective that I don't have to look at NIL myself on my own.
Yep.
They take care of me enough that I'm not worried about it. I understand that I'm here for school, and I understand that I'm here to perform on the field. And
Right.
he was okay with that. And so in his case, more power to him. Respect. He was a 4-star recruit, ESPN top 100 guy. But he doesn't need to worry about NIL because the collective takes care of him. And that's where the collective really comes in and eases that tension in the locker room to make sure that everyone's getting paid, everyone's making their money. And even though not everybody's making the same as a starting quarterback, everybody is still being taken care of. So
I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about collectives right now too. I don't think they realize that they are playing that big of a role because you take out the collective aspect of things in these big schools, like you have I'm not going to say it's definitely what happened, but you have a huge possibility that some of these Georgia football players, Alabama football players, wherever, Florida, you have a huge possibility that some of these guys that aren't getting as much playing time or aren't as doesn't have a recognizable name as their big top 5 guys, they could make little to no money when if you take out a collective because it's just you're not Bryce Young, you know?
Yeah.
And so I think that's a big misconception that people have right now because a lot of people are seeing collectives as kind of taking like a monopoly in the NIL industry because they have the chance to work with that
With schools.
whatever athletes they want out of the school that they represent. So I don't know. I think it's going to be interesting as we see things continue to play out because I mean it's still so new and like you said earlier, and it is the wild wild west. But one thing I'm very curious about, and I want to hear your opinion of, we talked about this today in one of my classes. Do you think that collectives, I don't want to say crack down, but do you think collectives are going to have more of a responsibility when it comes to Title IX and like evening the playing field across all sports, men's, women's?
Yeah.
Like for example, the Georgia collective, it's called the Classic City Collective, but they call it the 21 Club because there's 21 sports
Mhm.
at Georgia. And so do you think all 21 sports are going to have a even playing field when it comes to collectives raising money, or what do you think?
Yeah, so there's a couple questions in there. Even playing field is, I'm not going to say it, in my opinion, is not the right word because I don't think it'll be. It's like the quarterback situation.
Right.
Not everybody's going to have the same amount of money. In Title IX right now, it like that's not everybody has to be exactly even,
Mm.
but you go back to saying taken care of, everybody will have to be taken care of. And you see it happening right now, collectives and the way that NCAA is starting to move is making schools and collectives, surprisingly, to most people thought that this would actually go the opposite way. But now that we're seeing it play out, schools and collectives are being allowed not to work directly yet, but is moving in that direction. And so once we get to that point, where they are allowed to work directly, then collectives will be responsible for Title IX and really being able to tie those two together.
I
So,
agree. I the thing that really, there's two aspects about this that kind of makes me question how Title IX is going to be really enforced when it comes to collectives. The first thing is anybody can donate to a collective, right?
mhm,
So you could donate to a collective, I could donate to a collective. A lot of the collectives, you can pick where that money goes.
yeah,
So are you going to eliminate that factor when it comes to the donating process of you can't pick where it wants to go? Because all these alum, they're probably going to pick the football program, especially when it comes to, I mean, maybe Duke could be different. But you're going to pick to your top 1, 2, 3 sports.
yeah.
So you're going to have to eliminate the fact that you can choose that, and they're going to just bring in all the money and distribute it how they think.
Yeah, so that's where it will get interesting. And right now, the way that a lot of donors work with collectives, and by the way, we'll do an episode, probably our next episode, that will really dive into and explaining collectives. But for right now, collectives work with schools, not directly with schools, but work with schools to really impact recruiting and making sure the players are taken care of. Very short
Mm.
explanation of it. Um, but we where we see it going right now and the way that a lot of collectives do it currently are when you donate, you get put into this like category. And so a lot of them will use like bronze, gold, bronze, silver, gold, platinum, or something like that. And
Mm.
so if you donate $0 to $20, you get put in bronze, and then 21 to 50, you get put in silver, and so on and so forth. I think what we might see happen is you might have maybe if you're in that platinum or gold, you get to choose where the money goes to. And if you're in the other ones, then you're just donating to collective. That's one solution that I have in my mind. I don't know if that will be what happens. But it's a solution. And I think we might see something like that because you will. I mean, you won't be able to just, once you are responsible for abiding to Title IX, you won't be able to let everybody choose where it goes, especially if up to that point, you've seen everybody choose football or everybody choose basketball or whatever that may be like for that particular school. And so there will have to be a solution to that. But eventually, now that you're seeing collectives and schools working closer and closer together, those collectives will have to answer to the Title IX rules. And so that's where that's going to get interesting. And I know we've talked about where that can play into our agency before, something that we're trying to figure out and move forward in right now. But I'm excited to see one where the collective rules go, and then where they're really allowed to start to interact with schools, with players, with licensings, with trademarks, with all that kind of stuff. I mean, it'll get crazy. So
yeah. My last question for you before we move into our last topic is along those same lines. When it comes to free marketability, in the aspect of a collective goes to a business, they want to market, the business wants to market a certain team, group of athletes, whatever. At the end of the day, because that's a lot of what the NIL industry is. And so at the end of the day, when the business wants to choose what athletes they want, odds are they're going to probably pick from the, like I said, the baseball team, the football team, the basketball team. So then how does that play into also with Title IX if that business isn't picking the women's soccer team or the men's cross country team? Like, how does free marketability play into the spreading of Title IX?
Yeah, so there's two ways that collectives make money. And so that is through donors, and then also through those businesses that come through the collective and want to work with athletes through them. And so it might be, and this might be another solution to it, is donors don't get to choose where stuff goes, and then that way the collectives really have the power of making sure that it is distributed more evenly. And so if that is the case, then donors won't have a say, and then those businesses at the end of the day, they have the biggest say in what happens with the money. But also, once you start dealing with that, and here's the thing about Title IX and about kind of free marketability, is Title IX does not mean that everybody has to have the same amount of money. The football team and the women's basketball team, while are both school sports, both great sports, they do not have to have the same budget.
For sure.
And
it's impossible.
Exactly. And so,
especially you think about a school like Georgia who just won back-to-back national championships. Even when it comes to men's sports, our men's basketball team is starting to get a lot better, but we haven't made a March Madness run in probably, I think, 12 years. And so your football budget is going to be a lot different than your basketball budget.
Yeah, we also just look at the money that those sports bring in. I mean, here at Alabama, I don't know the exact numbers, but I know that majority of our sports are not revenue generating sports. And that's the case at pretty much every school.
Yeah.
But I know that our football team obviously is a revenue generating sport. And so not only is that budget that the football team's bringing in covering the football team, but it's also covering the women's basketball and the gymnastics and the women's soccer and all kinds of stuff like that, because that's just the way the world works. You have to have money. Money's going to flow. That's just the way that it flows. And so that's a big misconception of Title IX, is that everyone has to have equal amounts.
Right.
Everybody has to have equal amounts. Everybody has to have equal opportunity. And so
absolutely.
That is where
best way to put it.
Exactly. If a collective can prove that they're giving equal opportunity to each team, then that's where Title IX would come in. You don't have to, if the business wants to do a $3 million deal with a football player, that's great. If the collective can also sign a $300 deal to the women's basketball player, that's equal opportunity.
For sure.
And so that's where that starts to play in. And will be interesting to see how different collectives incorporate and try to figure out what they're going to do with that. So
Totally. Yeah. All right. So we're sort of running out of time here, but our last topic that I'm personally the most excited about, that it's very relevant in our time, what's going on right now in sports and the end of football season, the transfer portal.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about how NIL and collectives and all that, literally everything encompassed around, is affecting the transfer portal. And the transfer portal now, since it's kind of aligned with NIL, that you don't have to sit out a year in the transfer portal, and that's changing a lot of things. These guys have free reign to transfer whenever and wherever they want. Well, I shouldn't say whenever, but you transfer and you play.
Yeah.
That changes a lot of things. Texas A&M is a prime example of this big speculation. It's like, okay, Texas A&M had the number 1 recruiting class in the country last year.
Yeah.
I am sure there was millions of dollars poured into that.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
27 transfers.
Yeah.
27 transfers. Most out of any school. Top 3, all SEC schools actually. Texas A&M, 27 transfers. Arkansas, 26 transfers. Florida, 23 transfers.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at the trends with that, I mean, all those schools had disappointing seasons. I mean,
and all those schools put a lot of money into recruiting.
All those schools put a lot of money into recruiting. I know Florida and I know Texas. I'm not positive about Arkansas, but back to our conversation of the beginning of NIL and where states set laws and some states didn't set laws, Texas and Florida did not. And that was a big advantage that they had going into last season. Now, there's not a big advantage in that sense between Texas and Alabama and Georgia and Florida and all these other places, because now most of these places either have the same laws or have kind of just said free reign, good luck, don't get caught. And so now we start to see where that ends up, and you'll see, I mean, like A&M, they have 27 transfers. Where are those people going to go? Are they going to go to the places that they were initially committed to going, and then Texas A&M made them a big NIL promise? They decided that, hey, I'll go to Texas A&M for a year. Right. But then Texas A&M won 4 games, and now they're like, all right, well, I'm going to go to where I initially wanted to go anyways. And
so yeah, how is this going to work? There has to be some type of, if, like we said, I mean, this money isn't in the initial contract of writing out like you're going to get paid this much to come here. But what's to stop these kids from coming, getting their money, and transferring to where they originally wanted to go?
Yeah, well, that's so back to the Florida example. You saw that contract was over 4 years, and so supposedly 13 million over 4 years. If he wanted to come and play for 2 years and take half of that, great, he could do it. But if he transferred out after that second year, then, and again, I don't see the contract. I don't know where that was promised and how it all worked, but theoretically, Florida would only owe him for those 2 years. And so now we'll start to see where that really ends up and how it ends up going. But I mean, there's not a whole lot of rules to stop anything. So, and a lot of that is because they can't technically write in that contract that you're making money to play at the University of Texas A&M, at the University of Florida.
And like I was saying a second ago, like you can't crack down on these guys because now there's no law that says I can transfer and it affect me.
Yeah.
Because, and that's what the beauty, I liked the old transfer portal laws, because you run the risk. Yet if you really want to transfer, you run the risk of losing draft eligibility, whatever it may be, because you have to sit out a year.
Yeah.
And so now it's just free reign, man. Like you can
Yeah.
And that's we see a lot of in the signing process as well. You saw some of these guys flip day of like 2, 3 different schools. I can't
Yeah.
remember that one kid's name, but he flipped like 4 times.
Yeah.
And it's like it's so much free reign right now, which is scary, but it makes it entertaining to watch.
It absolutely does. From our seat, it's very entertaining to watch.
Yeah.
It's crazy how it all works. Um, we'll see. I mean, what rules end up being set, but right now, I mean, it is just basically free agency, and especially now with NIL and collectives and people making promises, and I mean, you're going really in most cases in a bidding war. Um,
Yeah.
but there's still a little bit of risk entering the transfer portal because technically you could enter, your team could give away your spot, and then if you don't get signed anywhere else, then you're no longer a scholarship player anywhere.
Right.
So there's a little risk, but for the most part, there's not. So, and you'll see some people they'll kind of enter and see what options there are, and then they'll go back. We saw it with Grayson McCall at Coastal Carolina.
Yep.
Um, and he entered. He wanted to see what he could get, and then ended up deciding, hey, Coastal's still the best option for me. People talked about his classes. People talked about NIL. I don't really know the exact reason for why he decided to go back to Coastal, but I mean, so many factors now play a role into it, and NIL is a major factor of that. And so,
New coaches.
yeah,
Yeah. Lots
yeah.
of different things.
So, but you also, I mean, you look at Colorado. Colorado has, I think, 24 people transferring out, maybe some really high number. But then also you look at Jackson State. Jackson State, Deion Sanders left, and so Deion Sanders is going to Colorado. Um, he walked
Think
in
about
the
how many are
room.
going to be transferring in.
Yeah, he walked in the room. He said, "Hey, I'm bringing my baggage into it's Louis." People decided they didn't want to be
Was
there
not
anymore.
wrong.
Yeah, and so I mean, he brought his son. He brought Travis Hunter. He brought all these people who are stud athletes. Um, but he also lost most of that Colorado team. And so we'll see what ends up happening there and how that ultimately affects everything. But I mean, he changed the team and he changed an entire culture in a matter of a couple days. And
Yeah,
so it's interesting to see how the transfer portal does end up long term affecting the sport and affecting teams like that.
for sure. Well, uh, last thing, kind of to piggyback off of that, it's kind of on the other side of things. Instead of transferring or signing or originally coming in, we're also seeing NIL is affecting people staying in college versus in the NFL or declaring to go to the NFL.
Yeah.
Michigan, we this new 1 more year campaign. They've got basically, if any of you guys don't know what it is, Michigan launched this one more year campaign, and it's basically this huge fund that is split between. Right now, I think it's just 4 players, but I
Hmm.
don't know if that's apt to change, like if they can add players on or not. But
I don't know
I
how
think
that works. I don't know who's technically running it because I don't think it's the collective that's running it. Like
right,
it's just
because
a
it's
fund
run
that
by
started
Michigan
it.
football. So I don't
So
like
it's
Michigan
not
football
run
is
by
advertising
Michigan.
it.
Michigan's football is advertising. Yes,
Right. They're not running it, but they
they're
are
not. They're
advertising
not.
it.
They're not allowed to run it.
Right. Right. I think it is a collective. I don't know. I don't know really how that's working.
I don't. I'm not sure. I don't know a whole lot about Michigan's collective and how they
Yeah,
work or who's in
sure.
charge and things like that. But I mean, yeah, it's a crowdfunding campaign. It's basically it's not on GoFundMe to my knowledge, but it's essentially a GoFundMe of any Michigan, and it's a super cool idea. I mean, as a fan of football, if you give me the opportunity, like here at Alabama, if you said, "Hey, you can be a part of the donation that brings Bryce Young back for 1 more year," they're not asking me for $100,000. They're asking me to give five. And so in Michigan's
But that
case,
adds up, and then Bryce Young is like, cha-ching. Okay,
yeah,
yeah, I'll stay 1 more year.
exactly. So in Michigan's case, you have their 4 players, including their star running back Blake Corum.
It's
Um,
Blake Corum, their wide receiver Cornelius Johnson, and then a left guard and a right guard, Trevor Keegan and Zach Zenter. I
exactly.
think are the main 4. I don't know if they're adding people onto that or not,
Yeah.
but
But so those are 4 major contributors to their offense. All would have gone, I mean, for sure in the draft. I'm not sure where they all would have gone in the draft,
right.
but I mean, they would have all made money and made decent money in the pros. And I mean, in Blake Corum's case, he would have. I don't know if he would have gone and immediately been a starting running back, but he would have gone and competed for it at the very least. Um, and so, I mean, you look at him bringing him back, that's a major contributor to the offense next year. And they gave fans, they gave anybody who wanted to contribute to Michigan the opportunity to. And so you're not guaranteed to, you don't have to give $20 a month. You don't have to give $1,000 check up front. You can be a student that gives $5. You can be an alumni that gives $100. Whatever you want to do, they just gave people the opportunity to do it. And so
Yeah.
I absolutely love it. I mean, it's a
And
great idea, and I think we'll see a lot of schools do it down the line from now.
and obviously the money is a huge incentive of it, but I think it's also really cool because you think about Blake Corum, for example, and was having an awesome season, was in talks of Heisman candidate, all this stuff, gets hurt, doesn't complete a season, so his draft stock could be way down.
Yeah,
And so he could be already considering, do I go to the NFL draft? I might get picked in the 4th or 5th round now compared to the 1st or 2nd. And so now this money that they have set aside, and they've given him the incentive and the, okay, yeah, if I do stay, like it'll be worth it. He
yeah,
can stay back. He makes that money. Then he goes and has a jam up year this year. He can run for Heisman. He can go 1st round. I mean, that's a game changer for a lot of guys. If that's an, I'm not saying this is obviously not an option like nationwide. I think it will start to see it a lot more now that we've seen Michigan, because they've really been the first to do it.
yeah.
And I think it'll be a lot more popular across the country moving forward into the coming years of football. But I think it's gonna start to pick up, and it's gonna make things really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to see what it ends up looking like down the line, who all gets involved with it, what schools do it. I mean, I'm excited for Blake Corum. I'm excited to see what he can do because, like you were talking about, he was competing for Heisman, and so what can he
Yeah.
do? Can he come back next year, win the Heisman, and go 1st round? I mean, because this year, like there were a lot of great running backs, and so you look at Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson is probably going to be a 1st round draft pick. And so next year, could Blake Corum be that 1st round draft pick? You know that you're going to get. Here's the thing: this one more year fund, it's not any kind of just like millions of dollars. I mean, I think last time I looked at it, it was right around $100,000 total in the fund.
Right.
So
Yeah.
assume you split that between all three guys. I mean, it's not a massive deal, or all four guys. It's not a massive deal, but it shows that you have support from your fan base. And it shows that at the very least, you're going to get paid and you can make your money to stay there for one more year. And then if
Absolutely.
you make that 2 round jump, if you go from being a 4th round pick to a 2nd round pick or a third to a first, whatever that may be,
You just
I mean,
upped your
just
signing bonus.
I was about to say, just in your signing bonus, you'll make that money back that you would have made in that extra year in the NFL, anyways. And so
Absolutely.
that's where it gets interesting in my head. I love the idea. I'm excited to see what schools do it. I hope that Alabama does it next year, and so we'll see what happens.
Yeah. That's awesome. Man, yeah. So for you guys, just a little insight of what we're trying to accomplish throughout this podcast is, I hope we're able to shed some light on some things that in our industry that maybe some misconceptions, or a little shed some light on things that aren't as knowledgeable to people around the country if you're not an athlete, if you don't necessarily work in NIL. So yeah, you guys come back, and we'll have another episode next week where Mike has said before, we're going to be really focusing, diving deep on collectives, and talking about what that looks like, how they're run, their connection to teams, and what that's going to look like. So
Absolutely, we're excited for it. We talked a lot about collectives on here, so I'm excited to come back next week and really dive deep and explain where they started from, what they're doing, how they really affect college sports. Because a lot of people know what a collective is or have heard
yeah.
the word collective, but have no idea what it really means. And so I'm excited to really debunk misconceptions and just try to explain those better.
Hey, and you never know, we might have a surprise special guest or something.
We'll see. It's in the works.
Awesome. Well, you guys hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you come back next week. Check us out on YouTube, Spotify, all that kind of stuff. Follow us on Instagram.
Yeah, absolutely. We will talk to
Bada
y'all
bing, bada boom.
next week. So see you later.